According to recent declarations by some government officials, we are now free to safely go buy groceries or a lawnmower. But then if we get in our cars and drive to a house of worship, we magically become a dangerous threat to public health and safety. We'll talk about how to push back. We'll also talk about a recent Supreme Court decision that took an ordinary English word and forced a brand new meaning onto it. We'll talk about the implications of that. Hi, I'm Stuart Shepard. Today we've got Dr. Albert Mohler, who's president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and my friend and colleague Kelly Shackelford, who's president and chief counsel here at First Liberty Institute. Hi, Al. Hi, Kelly.
Hey. Hello. Good to be with you both.
Thank you for being here. Hey, before we get started, I do need to mention that First Liberty just launched a brand new case that will blow your mind when you hear the details of it. Kelly and I will talk about that at the very end of this video, so you want to stick around for that. Okay, the two of you, Kelly and Al, got together to write a couple important editorials, a couple of opinion pieces, one in the Washington Post in April and one in Newsweek earlier this month. In the first one, you wrote in support of reasonable restrictions for churches as long as they were temporary and evenly applied. In the second one, you describe how public officials stretch the limits of reasonable, how they can't agree on what temporary means, and how some completely skipped over the evenly applied part. Al, now that we're at this point in the timeline of the pandemic, what's your advice for church leaders and members?
You know, I go back to where we began. COVID-19 is a real threat. It's a real disease, and there's a rational public health response to it. And many of the governors have taken the lead in our system of federalism to define these issues. And insofar as there are generally applicable, rational, and temporary measures, we've encouraged Christians out of love of God and love of neighbor to respect those. But it's clear that in many cases, every one of those qualifications is being trampled upon. The generally applicable, the rational, the temporary. And so you've got some states where an open hostility to religious assemblies is now evident. And this is where the First Liberty is very much on the line. And, you know, even today, I was confronted by the fact that in so many states, just looking at the situation this morning, in so many states, you can have all kinds of businesses, events, even now entertainment venues open, and yet not churches. I mean, the most irrational sign of this to me is where you say, we're going to reopen cinemas. I mean, people are going to be sitting in movie theaters for hours watching a movie, but you don't have the same kind of openness for churches. Clearly, something's going on here. That's a targeted violation of the First Amendment. And so that's why we have to be vigilant.
It also strikes me that I've seen a lot of churches and church leaders that are willing to cooperate with the government to try to do the right thing. But I'm also seeing a lot of state officials that are saying, forget you. We don't need your cooperation. We're gonna drive you into the ground here with our restrictions and regulations.
Yeah, again, it's turning into, in some cases, what can only be kind of an open, premeditated hostility, because we have seen cases in which governors have done things that were just not wise, and some of them have backtracked on those. Here in Kentucky, the governor announced in the early stages of the pandemic that churches should not meet, but he was going to allow high school basketball games to go on. And when I and others immediately said, look, that's just illegitimate, he did correct it within 24 hours. And so I'll give him credit for that correction. But right here in Kentucky, with our mayor in the city of Louisville and with the governor himself, we've had some continual struggles. And then in states like California and Michigan and others, it's been even tougher.
And Kelly, Al mentioned the case out of Louisville. That's one where we represented the church there and got a favorable outcome from a judge. In this environment, it is impossible for church leaders to discuss the reopening of their churches or even for other leaders to discuss the opening of a synagogue or whatnot without a discussion of the very real possibility of being sued. What do they need to be thinking about, and what do they need to be doing?
Well, number one, we've been working really hard with Congress to try to get protections for, because we want, when people can open safely, businesses, churches, we want them to open. We don't want fear of lawsuits, because there's been some silly lawsuits. Like, I mean, for instance, the cruise lines. One of the lawsuits is just a great example. Was not that the person got COVID from the cruise line, but they said that the cruise line didn't have all the protections that this person thought they should have, and therefore they were suffering mental anguish because of that, even though they didn't get the disease. So, you know, if we have that kind of thing, keeping churches and businesses from reopening is wrong. So we encourage Congress, and if they do pass another stimulus, I don't know if they will or not, and we're not advocating for or against, they need to put some of these protections in, the same ones that they put for the people who make masks, who are providing health care and all this, that, you know, any sort of wanton, sort of reckless conduct, you're still responsible for, but we're not going to allow these frivolous lawsuits. What churches can do, though, is we have on our website under COVID-19, the precautions they can take, things to keep their congregation safe, and the states have those as well. So there's things they can do to be safe, and that's the best thing they can do, is do everything they can to be safe, and they show that they've done everything they knew to do. And then I don't think people are going to get COVID these days. They're going to get it at all kinds of places. So the church really shouldn't be held responsible as long as they've met all the guidelines that are out there.
Al, one larger question in the national conversation is whether churches are essential. Give me your best argument for why churches are an essential part of a community.
Well, I want to back up a little bit, if you'll allow me, and say the first thing I want to insist upon is the fact that no government authority has the right to say that any form of Christian worship or assembly is essential or non-essential. That's not the state's power. Now, I understand that when they're making distinctions in a time of urgency between those things that will be open and are considered essential and those things that are not, it seems to me that the United States Constitution ought to be the first guide as to how those issues ought to be defined. And you can't start out looking at the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the very first affirmation in the Bill of Rights, and come up with the fact that religious liberty is anything other than essential. And religious liberty means nothing if Americans can't assemble for worship or for whatever other cause of the religious assembly. So again, we understand that in a time of crisis, a public health emergency, a generally applicable order means that we're going to want to do everything we can out of love of God and love of neighbor to protect everyone in the community. But you know, even when churches, given the guidelines and given just best advice, chose not to meet for some time, that's different than a government saying we're going to categorize you as non-essential or unessential. That to me is one of the most unconstitutional acts imaginable in spirit and in substance.
You know, Stuart, one of the things I would love to throw in on this is I really think it's sort of revealed a mindset with a number of these government officials that they think that the things that are material are the things that are essential, and the things that are not material are not. And what a foolish statement. I mean, if you ask what's really essential in this country, it's probably the things that, like, you know, courage, freedom, liberty. I mean, the things that the church is battling for too. So they've almost got it backwards. The really essential things to this country are our freedoms, are, you know, the types of things we need to deal with the chaos erupting around our country right now, the things that the church provides, that peace, that love, that joy, all the things that really are the most important. So it's interesting how the state tends to see material goods as the things that are essential.
I think that's a very good point. I think another aspect of that, Kelly, is where you see the true worldview, the true heart and mind commitments of people come out, where they've been defining liquor stores as essential, cannabis shops as essential, and even abortion as essential, and churches not. I mean, there you have the culture of life versus the culture of death. And rarely do you see such honesty, let me put it that way, on the part of some of these government leaders.
Al, you've got a new book that came out earlier this month called The Gathering Storm. The title is an homage to a volume by Winston Churchill of the same name. He was talking about the gathering storm in Nazi Germany at the time.
That's right.
By storm, you're referring to the ongoing clash of secular versus Christian worldviews in our culture right now. And from what I'm reading, you say we need to be able to see it before we can properly respond to it. Build out that thought for us.
Yeah, it is an act of honoring Winston Churchill for that. First of all, he's been an inspiration to me my entire adult life. But that great 6-volume history of the Second World War he wrote with that first volume, The Gathering Storm, goes back to the 1930s in particular, when he nearly alone saw the truth of what Nazi Germany was becoming as a threat and tried to warn all of the free world. And no one was listening to him until when, of course, the war came. He was the only person to whom King George VI could turn, who had the credibility to lead because he had said the truth. And what I really want to point to here, and I appreciate your reference to the book, is the fact that evangelicals tend to see the landscape and they see this thing and this thing, this reality, this threat, this puzzling development. I want to help evangelical Christians understand it's all part of the same thing. And it's a fundamental shift in our society, the process of secularization and an active, ardent push of secularists to redefine the basic contours of America, to in fact redefine the entire American experiment in ordered liberty. And there's an open hostility now to cognitive, genuine, convictional Christianity. And you just think about what's happened in the Supreme Court in the last 10 days, or in particular, go back to last Monday, and you recognize we're going to be battling for our right to be faithful Christians for the rest of our lives.
And here's the line in your book that I highlighted on my Kindle. You said, quote, "We do not need a political movement. We need a theological protest." What would that look like?
Yeah, what I mean by that first and foremost is that we need a political movement in the context of the book. What I'm saying there is that for Christians, it's got to be rooted in more than politics. It's got to be our theology translated into politics, not politics translated into theology. And so the protest there, it doesn't mean what most Americans are going to think of right now. It means protest like Protestant. It means a theological protest. It means a statement of conviction. We have to know who we are, what it is we believe, and based upon those beliefs, how we translate this into everyday life. As evangelical Christians, I will say this is the kind of prophetic word that someone like Francis Schaeffer was offering in the late 1970s and the 80s, and yet most Americans thought that the world was going to continue as it was then, and it hasn't. And so we've got to awaken the church to the challenges that we now face. Politics is a part of our responsibility, but the church's first responsibility is theological, and that leads to everything else.
Let's talk about that in light of current headlines, Kelly. Recently, the Supreme Court decided what on the face of it was an employment case, but the decision essentially came down to 6 of the justices adding new meaning to a plain English word in a law that was written 45 years ago, 55 years ago. Kelly, describe what happened in the Bostock decision and what should we be sharing with our friends when we talk about it?
This decision was over Title VII, which is a law that was passed in 1964 that says you can't discriminate in the workplace on the basis of sex, race, religion, but sex, of course, back then meant male, female. And today, now people were trying to say, well, we want it to have a new meaning. We want it to include transgenderism and sexual orientation and all these other things that they clearly never meant when they passed it. To everybody's shock, I say everybody but us, because we kind of had warned when Gorsuch was picked as a Supreme Court justice. We say he's really good on religious liberty, but he had this opinion he had joined that really inferred that he might not be so good on this transgenderism issue and creating what he created in this case. So we kind of foresaw this a little bit as a possibility. And now everybody's coming back to us and saying, boy, you told us about this, and wow, we wish we'd have listened more. But what he did is he now weaponized this, not only in this statute, because if sex now means transgender, et cetera, now all these people can bring claims in every state in the country. And it's not just even this statute, because there are hundreds of other statutes that have the word sex. in the statutes, state statutes, federal statutes, that now this case will be cited to say, well, sex now means, and so now if you're trying to run a business, all these weapons can come against you if you call somebody a he when they want to be a she. If your bathrooms, it's endless. Women's sports are no more. If men and women doesn't make a distinction, you can't really have women's sports. So it's just open a floodgate of what will be litigation. The good news in the case is there were a couple of paragraphs where the court said, we want to make clear there are no religious claims in this case. So we're not answering that question. When there's a conflict between this and religious freedom, that's a big issue that we're going to have to decide in the future. So will religious freedom be a shield to this new weaponizing? We hope so, but we don't know until we get to the Supreme Court. So we now have a flood of new litigation that's going to occur. Religious freedom is going to be the defense, and we're going to have to win that battle all the way to the Supreme Court.
So Al, that's a legal perspective. Now put it into a theological perspective for us.
Well, theologically, we have to understand that this same recklessness with which the Supreme Court treated the words of the statute in 1964, we've got preachers and liberal theologians have been using the same kind of strategies with the Holy Scripture as you see the progressives on the court with the Constitution and statutory law. It comes down to whether or not a text means what a text means. And oddly enough, as Kelly said with Justice Gorsuch, he claims to be a textualist, but he divorced it from the historic meaning of the words. And if you do that, then you just create havoc. And again, as he said, the word sex now embedded all throughout not only law, but policy and everything else. Now we are told that by a 6-3 vote of the Supreme Court, as of last Monday, that word doesn't mean what human beings have understood it to mean for as long as the English language has made any sense. And so theologically, we have to hold to our convictions. And as Christians, this is not something that's up for the authority of the United States Supreme Court. On the religious liberty front, the big concern to me here is that this Supreme Court decision effectively, despite Justice Gorsuch's paragraphs on this, it effectively puts Christian institutions, employers, organizations, churches in the position of being a supplicant coming before the courts to ask for an exemption from the court's interpretation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That is, I think, incalculably worse than most Christians yet understand. And I also have a theory of cultural history that supplicants who come asking for exemptions are a way of transitioning to the unthinkability of those exemptions. I'm just saying this is even when we win these victories, they're going to be temporary, and I think we have to recognize that. One further thing, and I'll simply say, politics matters a lot in this, and so we need to remember that one of the arguments that Justice Gorsuch made in his majority opinion was that one of the protections for religious liberty is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA, which he called a super statute. Well, it is only until it isn't. And the Equality Act being pushed by Democrats in the United States House, and if there's a Senate majority, I expect there, and to which I believe that party will be committed in its 2020 platform, means the nullification of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So Justice Gorsuch time-stamped that opinion for June of 2020, but the very argument that he used, implausible as I believe it is on its face, could well fall apart in other respects within a matter of months.
Kelly, I saw you nodding strongly on the idea of churches having to look for favors from the courts. What are you thinking?
Well, what happened is, again, a weapon was created. And so now, instead of you not having to worry about the weapon being used against you, now you do. And so all you can do is protect yourself, right? I mean, that's kind of what he's talking about. It's like now it's put all religious employers, religious individuals, churches, nonprofit, they're all now somewhat on the defensive because this nuclear weapon has been created to come after them in all kinds of different aspects. Are there some exemptions? Yeah. Is the Constitution going to protect? We sure hope so. But it's definitely put churches and religious freedom in a very dangerous position. And so long term, we can get religious freedom, but we really need to turn things around. We need a revival. We need to change these laws where they don't create weapons to be used against people that have different beliefs. But it's dangerous. What happened in that opinion is dangerous. It's going to create lots of litigation. And again, the best we can do is win the religious freedoms to not have to follow that. But look, there are lots of non-religious freedom issues that are still going to be implicated by this anyway. For instance,
That's right.
Women's sports, right? I mean, there is no women's sports anymore. And that has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with what sex is. And so there's a multitude of things, even that religious freedom will have no aspect to. It'll totally reorient and change our society. I mean, your kids go to public school. There's going to be bathrooms. Yeah, here's your little granddaughter now going into the bathroom with different people of different sexes. I mean, there's just all kinds of things that religious freedom won't protect that are going to happen. And so while we're going to fight on the religious freedom front, this is even bigger than that.
We want those of you watching to be able to talk about the Bostock decision confidently with your friends. So we've put together a one-sheet, a one-page summary with all the important points about this case so that you can be knowledgeable about it. It's our gift to you. It's free. You can find it on our website. Just look at the top of the page. There'll be a link there. And again, it's about the Bostock case, and it's a summary so that you can be knowledgeable about this case and discuss it in your Sunday school classes or friends or family or wherever. I'd like to toss this next question to both of you, and Al, you already talked about it a little bit, but unpack for us why the plain meaning of words is so important to law. Just that idea of changing the meaning of one word, what does that do to law as a concept?
Well, let me step back a moment as a theologian, first of all, and say, let's consider how a Christian reads the Bible. The Bible is a text. I believe it is the verbally inspired, inerrant, infallible Word of God. So let's just take a text and let's just take the word. Let's look at Genesis 1. Male and female created he them. In his image created he them. Male and female. Well, do those words have determinative meaning? And if so, who are we going to ask now? Are we going to ask the policymakers of the student manual at Harvard University what male and female means? No, when we're reading Genesis, we're looking at exactly what was written in the text meant by male and female when that text was written. And if those words change in meaning, well, that happens over time. That's why you have to study. That's what we call the most important study of the scripture, the grammatical, historical interpretation of scripture. That is, you're looking at the words, but you're understanding exactly what those words meant when they were written. When you take the Constitution of the United States, the same rule should apply. And Justice Scalia, by the way, set this out very, very clearly in many of his writings and lectures. And it comes down to the fact that the words have to be understood as they were understood at the time. Now, there's an honest way to change that. It's called legislation, or when it's in the Constitution, it's called amending the Constitution. What's not an intellectually legitimate way to do that is to say, we're now going to make those words mean something they didn't mean. Of course, now the liberals on the court have taken that a lot further. You go back to 1960s and the Griswold decision, Justice Douglas was not even saying they're in the words. He said they're in, emendations and penumbras, emendations coming from the words. Now, that's what liberals have done with the Bible for, over 100 years. And then liberal justices have been doing that on the Supreme Court. And look, frankly, that's what every teenager wants to do with what his parents tell him about the rules. If he can make the words mean something other than what his parents meant, then hey, all's fair. It leads to nonsense in the entire society.
Yeah, that I would say from a legal standpoint, the answer to your question is it destroys the rule of law. The rule of law is, people take it for granted. It's such a gift in this country because if you don't have the rule of law, it's ruled by force, by brute force.
That's right.
We pass over from one president, from one party to another peacefully. All this is because we sort of respect the rule of law. if the rules don't mean anything because you just change the meanings of the words, you're in Alice in Wonderland, then you really are losing the rule of law. You don't have any consistency. You don't know what it means. Whoever's in power changes it to mean what they want it to mean. It's very dangerous and damaging, and which is why everybody was so, I think most people, especially on the conservative side, more excited about judging that was moving back to the original meaning, originalism. And everybody thought, Gorsuch was he was a real Scalia follower, that he was about originalism. So that's one of the shocking things about this opinion, is that he went through such mental gymnastics to really violate the very thing that he said he was in favor of to come to this conclusion. So, but the rule of law only exists if words have meaning. And when you change the meaning like this, it really does disturb things.
Kelly, I appreciate that point. I was in conversation immediately after the decision with some very shocked members of the legislature. And one of them made a very keen observation and lament, and that is this. After this decision, no legislator, no member of the United States House or the United States Senate can be sure that the legislation adopted, say in the year 2020, means what the Congress said it meant in 2020. It means that every single piece of legislation now is open to subsequent basic revolution just by saying the words mean something else.
Yes.
That actually subverts the rule of law right now in terms of the authority of Congress to frame legislation.
And that is an enormous concept, I think, for people to get a grasp of, to understand what this is, because every law that we have is written with words, but if the words no longer are buckets of meaning, there is no law. It's just gone. Al, before we let you go, I want to give you an opportunity to encourage people watching to confidently engage the culture, even in this time of such turmoil and with secularism moving in as a worldview. What would you say to people if you could speak directly to them to confidently engage the culture?
I would say, first of all, the most important thing to recognize is that Jesus Christ is Lord. And when it comes to Christians, the most important promise to us is not made in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, as much as we treasure that. The most important promise to us is made by Jesus in Matthew chapter 16. Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So that's good news. Look, Christianity was not born into the blessings of the American constitutional order. It was born into the context of the oppression of the Roman Empire. Christians have had to figure out from the very beginning of Christianity how to function faithfully in a fallen and sometimes very hostile world. The other thing is that we know the truth. We know the living Christ. We know the gospel. And we actually know God's plan for human flourishing and for human good. And so we're called to engage the culture, to be salt and light. And look, that doesn't mean we win every battle. Monday of last week's a reminder, we don't win every battle. But it is a reminder of the fact we are called to this battle and to stay in this battle, not because we're keeping score, but because we know what's at stake. And so I will just say this: Christians need to be winsome, hopeful. People ask me, are you optimistic or pessimistic? A Christian really can't be either. The Christian mode is hope. So we stay in hope. We're armed for the battle. We encourage one another. It makes me thankful for colleagues such as all of you there at First Liberty. And we're in a great cause together. And, I'm not going to quote Shakespeare, but, there's something important about those great speeches going into war in which he says, "We happy band." Yes. Okay. So we've got the joy of Christ. We're going to enter into this as Christians. We may lose a few battles. We will. We do. But we're in this because it really matters. We are responsible to do our very best in love of God and love of neighbor and love of our own children and grandchildren to seek to preserve truth and liberty in a world that's increasingly hostile to both. So with that word of encouragement, stay in the battle.
Dr. Albert Mohler, thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you join in with us.
Thank you. It's good to be with you and Kelly and all the rest. We're thankful for you in the battle.
All right. We'll let you skip out of the call. I know you've got things to get to. Kelly, if you'll stick around, I wanted to ask you about this new case that we just launched, the Gail Blair case. It's up in Rhode Island. Tell us the facts of this story. I mean, when I first heard this, I couldn't believe anyone would think that what they did there could be right under the law or the Constitution?
Gail is a woman, a wonderful woman who got a disease where she was slowly going blind. And as she was in that process, she really was brought to the fact that there was nothing really more important than people coming to know the Lord. And so as she became blind, she had been a nurse before, and she loved serving people, helping people. And the way she could best serve and help people now was to let them know about Jesus. So she lives across the street from her as a public park, and she would go there and she would take a Gospel of John, and if she heard somebody coming to sit next to her on the bench or whatever, she would say, "Would you like the Gospel of John?" And that's what she did. Well, shockingly, the park officials told her that she was not allowed to come to the park for at least 2 years because she had shared her faith by providing a Gospel of John. Not only that, she was banned from going to the library. So they've told this blind woman that she can't go to the park across the street from her home. She can't go to the library. And then they even sent police officers to her home to warn her not to go, or they would be trespassing. And so that's the case that we have. We filed in the Civil Rights Commission in Rhode Island to hopefully put an end to this, but you can't even believe that they're doing what they're doing to this woman, and it's mind-boggling, really is.
And my understanding is she volunteered to help with her church's vacation Bible school, which just happened to be at that park, and the police officers told her she had to go, and if she showed up again, she'd be arrested.
That's right. Yeah, she's a criminal for actually wanting to share a Gospel of John with somebody in the public park. That's not the way things work in America, and this is going to be rectified. And so we're at the beginning of the process. We hope it ends soon, so that she doesn't have to go anymore. But she's faithful, and we're going to go as long as we have to make sure that this stops and that this doesn't happen to anybody else.
Yeah. Well, if it's important to you to see an effective defense of churches, faith-based organizations, and individuals, if that's something that matters to you, if you're concerned about them being targeted in the gathering storm in our culture, your gift to First Liberty will help make that happen. We're inviting you to go all in together with us, because when we do, we can win. Thanks to some generous supporters, we have a $350,000 challenge grant for the end of our fiscal year, which is coming up in just a few days. That challenge grant will maximize the impact of your gift right now. And Kelly, as I've gotten to meet the people that we represent, one thing that always strikes me is they're just regular people. They didn't go looking for trouble. Trouble came looking for them.
That's exactly right. Yeah, they and I think of the Kleins. We're talking about the situation after Bostock, where all these businesses now are going to be open to all this flood of lawsuits. And you know what? The Kleins have been fighting for 6 or 7 years. They had their bakery. It got closed down because they couldn't do the same-sex wedding cake. And, they could have moved from Oregon to like Texas and opened a bakery and done just fine. But they know if they leave that they're not going to get a solution to the case. And they know that millions of people are depending upon them. If they want to run their business according to their faith, they've got to stay in this situation, which has been brutal for them, but they've just been faithful. So for us to be able to come alongside people like Aaron and Melissa Klein and Sweet Cakes and again, Gail Blair, what a privilege. And so I would just tell people, we're here at our fiscal year end for First Liberty. When they support us, they're standing with these people. They're standing next to them. They're holding their arms. They're saying, we're with you. And it's really a privilege that we get to do what we get to do. And our clients are regular, normal people who, can never afford this, but they're also not so regular because they're actually brave. They're willing to stand for their faith, and they benefit us so much by what they're doing.
So if you go to firstliberty.org, a graphic will pop up that makes it easy for you to give. We appreciate the support that you send our way. I want to say thank you in advance. It makes a real difference to the people we represent. Kelly, thank you for finding time for us today and sharing your thoughts. Very insightful.
Thank you, Stuart.
All right. And thank all of you for going all in for religious freedom.